Welcome to the Conscious Radio Network. Become enlightened, have fun, and tell all your friends and family to share with everyone they know. You can watch us on YouTube and Rumble while following us on Facebook, or find us on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Our podcasts can be found on Libsyn, iHeart, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and more. Most of all, remember to go to our official website at consciousradionetwork.com for past episodes, future shows, and scheduling. We also want to welcome our international audience. Don't stop now. Enjoy the community. Subscribe or follow today.
This is the Conscious Radio Network.
Good morning, wherever you might be on the spaceship we call Earth. Welcome to Conscious Radio Network's podcast series, The Seance. And this is actually called, there's a special series we're going to be doing, which is once a month on second Monday of the month. It's called Before the Veil. And what's really cool, this really blends into what we're going to be talking about today, the veil. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Paul Meck. If this is your first time chiming in, please click like, subscribe, comment. Also, don't forget to follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. When Spirits Call. As a medium, she's been hearing her spirit since the age of 4. She believes in living a grounded life that's led by spirit. She guides clients and business owners alike on the importance of intuition first, challenging you to think about work and life from the inside out. She's passionate about the mental wellness that comes from the spiritual life, combining her spiritual gifts with her education and social work and with her love of business. She delivers a unique experience, her rare ability to speak to the energy of spirit, business, and feelings. She taps into the heart of people who are searching for the meaning and purpose of their lives. She intuitively weaves practicality with purpose and mission while encouraging her clients to do the same. Let's welcome to the seance, Carolina Gutierrez.
Thanks for having
my friend.
me, Paul.
How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Very welcome. Very welcome. I'm doing well. The heat in Florida, man, it's getting crazy. Going to be but the summer's almost. This is a very fast year. This
Absolutely
is the fastest year ever that I can remember.
Blink of an eye, it's gone.
Yes, yes. So I normally ask all my guests, and usually I lead into the show. The first question is how this all started, but we know when. But take us back in time. How did this start for you?
So I can say now and recognize what it was when I was 4. I didn't know at the time, and I didn't know for many years after that, even though it was still kind of present. But I still remember it very clearly. It was a Sunday afternoon, crappy TV, cold day in Toronto, so we're inside. Yeah. And it was a TV show, or like a small segment on therapeutic touch. And I had no idea what that was. And I'm like watching the segment of people like hovering their hands over somebody's body and over plants. And I was like, oh my God. And my eyes were wide. And this is fascinating. What is this? Yeah. And I remember I'm watching and I started to hover my hand over the plant that was right next to the TV. And then, of course, at the end, a stern voice comes through and it's like, and you should not be doing this if you're not trained, and be very careful. And, like all that fear that's thrown in there. And I was like, oh. And I remember like just kind of moving my hand away, and a very distinct, very adult, very separate voice just came into my head. And it's like, no, keep doing it. Do it. Continue what you're doing. Hover your hand, and I was like, and I remember being very like kind of stopping and looking around and being like, where's that voice coming from? Like, what is this? And over the years, like it really developed into what I thought was my own voice until I recognized, kind of what was going on. But, that was the very, very first time. And it wasn't until I was well into my adulthood and as a working medium that I recognized that and that I recalled that. I don't remember what it was, but I was like, oh, right. There was that time, like I can describe the apartment we lived in, and we had a little red TV set. And, like it was very impactful because it was just so unique of an experience for my short lived life at that time. And then, yeah, it really developed into an internal voice. I thought it was my own internal voice. And I thought everybody had this experience. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I really made sense of what that was. But yeah, I wish I could tell people, like I woke up knowing and understanding. No, absolutely not. I fumbled my way through it, kind of like everybody does in life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, from what happened then, how did this develop into what you do now, and what do you do now?
So I was in my early 20s, and I was taking a workshop on hypnosis, and there was a medium in the group, and we were all getting little readings at lunch. I don't even think I had maybe a reading as a teenager from somebody, but when she came to me, she said, "Oh my God, you're more intuitive than I am. You really need to be doing this for a living."
Yeah.
What? And it really, you could have knocked me over with a feather, right? That I don't, maybe now this is a case, but I have yet to meet somebody that has planned on being a psychic consciously in this life, maybe before, right? But
Yeah.
no one kind of sets as a career goal.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting moment when that happened, because I remember going home and just kind of sitting with that for a while. And then all of these really weird instances in my life up to that point started to make sense, right? I picked someone out of a crowd of like 10,000 people, and I said, "You're so and so." And I had never met them. This was pre-internet. So I had no idea. And I remember the guy sitting next to him said, "You need to be careful with that girl. That's a witch right there."
Yeah.
Because, so like there's instances like that really kind of color my life prior to understanding that. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay. So this wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't a fluke. It was, there's something else there. So what was really cool though, I think anyway, was when that happened, when I had that reading and I came home that night and I was thinking about it, the voices came back into my head, and they've been always there, right? Always there. But they came in, they're like, "Great, now you understand what it is. Let's get to work." And I could literally kind of see this. I could see them like, yes, like now we can, now you understand. Let's get going. So, and my life has never been the same since.
Wow. Now it's very. You mentioned too, especially on your website, there is an importance with working with spirit and getting in touch with particular spirits, and those would be our ancestors and or spirit guides. What is your thought and the importance of working and trying to get in contact with or in touch with the energy of our ancestors?
Oh, Paul, you're talking my favorite topic here. Yeah, absolutely. So you have to just a little bit of a step back before I get into that. I'm not a trained medium in that I did not go to mediumship school, let's say, or all of my training has been provided to me by my spirits, by my guides and my ancestors. So, like I've had classes with them. I sit with them. They're like, "Okay, this is what we're going to learn today. This is how we're going to build up to this." And so for me, the role that my ancestors and my guides play is absolutely foundational in working with spirit. And I always say that I find it to be the safest form of working with spirit, because you're not using your own energy. You are relying on the team that is closest to you, which is your ancestors and your guides, and particular ones in that team. And I can go in a little bit to how I kind of recommend people kind of discover which ones those are. But your guides are handpicked for you, right? Before you come, they are specialists on you and how you work. And your ancestors are the absolute closest spirit allies that you can create whether you do spirit working or not. Like I recommend that people connect with these energies, even if they're like accountants or taxi cab drivers or, whatever the case may be, because they're there for you, whether you're meant to work with spirit with the public or whether it's just your private practice or living your life regularly. But, you know, and I say this as somebody who, when I started, I wasn't working with my ancestors. That came in about 10 years, at the 10-year mark of working with spirit. And I always compare it to, imagine listening to your favorite song and you're hearing it played on the guitar and you're like, this is amazing. You get the shivers. You're like, you could play it on repeat over and over again. And then you're introduced to that same song, but an entire orchestra or an entire band is playing it and you're hearing all the instruments.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, how could this all of a sudden become better? It was already perfect to begin with. And that's the difference, in my opinion, of bringing in your ancestors into this work.
Yeah. And a thought had just come to mind. There's a lot of people, the majority of people, let's just say everybody other than those who work with spirit would ask, well, how is that important to me? Because I don't work with spirit, or I do this or I do that and stuff. What would be a way for somebody? What is the importance of trying to connect with your ancestors, regardless whether you're working with spirit in general as a practice?
Well, I would argue that we're all working with spirit, whether we recognize that or not,
Yeah.
right? And whether it's that you're charging the public for it or not, right? These teams, whether it's our ancestors or guides, mostly, we'll put the exceptions to the side right now. But I know you're open to the exceptions, so maybe we'll talk about the exceptions after. But mostly their goal, their job is to get us to fulfill our purpose here. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's important, whether your purpose is to work with spirit, like you and I, or whether your purpose is to be the most wonderful kindergarten teacher on the planet. Whatever that is, you've come here for a reason. And so that intuition, though those spirits that guide you, whether you're aware of them or not, are all leading you to that purpose, that reason why you've come, and to fulfill it in the best way possible. So, for those people that are like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'm not happy. I know that there's something else for me there. This is, maybe I'm not in the right line of work, or maybe this relationship isn't fulfilling. That's why you talk to them. That's why you build a connection with them, because they're leading you to what that is that you're here to do, so that you aren't asking those questions. I don't know if we ever stop asking those questions, but you can feel the difference between asking those questions and being like, I still feel like I'm in a good place, versus not.
Yeah. Yeah. And we always just, and inherently it seems like we not only ask ourselves, but we always ask. It seems like, when we're asking ourselves, what am I doing here? What do I,
Yeah.
Ultimately that's what you're doing. You're asking the universe, you're asking your guides, you're asking the spirit world for those, answers to those questions. And it's interesting when you hear the answer back.
Yes. And and I can tell you right now, people will be like, oh, I'd love to do, and like, because you probably aren't going to like what you hear.
Yeah.
Right. That's the part that most people don't talk about. I'm like, you want to hear? Great. But you probably aren't going to like it. Not because it's mean or evil. No, I'm not even going in that realm. I'm like, you might want to go to A, thinking this is where you want to go. And Spirit's like, no, this is where you have to go. It's actually C. And in this part of town. And you're kind of like, what? So it's, it's always a learning experience. Right?
Yeah. And sometimes the truth hurts. So, and that's the thing is, they have a bird's eye view in the spirit world, another dimension. Space, time doesn't exist. They see everything. They can witness everything, past, present, and future. And not that they're going to give you the future. They're just going to go, I'm going to give you some breadcrumbs here. Yeah. Just show you the way.
I say my analogy for the universe is the universe is the absolute most frustrating project manager that I've ever worked with. And I can't get the business side out, right? So they know there's order, and everything happens for a reason, and there's these things at play that are being managed on the back end, but you're only given this tiny snippet to work with. And then you're
Yeah.
getting the next tiny snippet to work with. So you don't even know what project you're working on most of the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like the universe is going to do what it's going to do, and there's no changing it. It's absolute. But us being within the mix, we're being guided and helped and kind of being driven in a game of dodgeball,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, people struggle with that idea because the new age has very much sold us on you can manifest everything in your life, and you can, and I believe that to a point, but I believe that is valid until it brushes up with your purpose.
Mm.
And if you're trying to manifest something that is not in line with your purpose, you're going to constantly be
Yeah.
brushing up against that.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that negate the theory or the thought of that everything is predestined?
I think both can exist at the same time. I think it's a dance.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have free will and you have destiny,
Yeah.
and they dance a dance, right?
Yeah. And I think everything is changing too. What could happen? Like, for instance, like if I'm giving a reading to somebody, or that I've given readings to somebody, and what I'm picking up now doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. It's what's on this path at this point in time. The universe,
Based on the current decisions that we're making.
the
Yeah,
universe might
absolutely.
do some really crazy stuff between now and the next month. And then suddenly, oh, no, Spirit's like, no, okay, let's go this way instead of that way.
Yeah. Absolutely, right? It's dynamic, right? It's you see that a lot in practices where rituals or spirit work, where they're divining through the whole session, right? Because you might have like a set path of like, okay, this is how this ritual is going to work, and then they're like, no, hold on, we got to check because something might have switched between the setting it up and what's happening live and in the moment.
Yeah. Now you do some spirit work, some of the stuff I've seen on your website. Actually, before we go any further, speaking of website, how can people find you? Actually, let me bring up. Normally, I have the ticker up. Let me bring this up. For those who are watching, can actually see it, but for those who are listening, tell people how they can find you and where they can get a hold of you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. It's curandera, CURANDERA.ca. So, and that's the only place. So I'll never reach out to anyone via Instagram or any other mode. So any booking that's done, any questions, it's all through there.
All right. And we'll have that also in the show notes. So for those who are listening, they can go to there. Now, as far as on your website, I see a lot with a lot of the Native American stuff. What do you do with kind of work do you do with the Native American shaman? Yeah.
So I use shamanic techniques, absolutely, but it's more informed from my ancestral background. So my parents are from South America, from Colombia. And so it is part of the First Nations communities there, as well as the First Nations practices that were brought over during the transatlantic slave trade. Mm-hmm. So those are very prominent ancestors that play a role in my practice. And then there's the combination of the expelled Jews from Spain and Portugal, kind of all mixing in, creating very much of an interesting tradition. And that's where you get the curandera name. It's a curanderismo is a tradition found throughout Latin America. And they are spirit intermediaries, and their practices are influenced from all the different types of migration in the area.
Huh. Wow.
So definitely, like very shamanic. I absolutely have an animistic worldview. I believe that everything has a spirit. Everything is interconnected. I recognize that, and again, I didn't start working with my ancestors for at least 10 years in doing this work. So I have a very clear how my work worked and was effective before, and what the change has been since bringing them in for the last 10 years. And yeah, they absolutely, it absolutely plays a huge role in recognizing when you're working with somebody that it's not just spirit as in the basic that we consider spirit, kind of otherworldly, right? There, you are made up of thousands of people that walked before you, and you
Yeah.
hold that in your, in your meat suit and
Yeah.
running through your veins, right? And so, unfortunately, that is a tradition that has been very much lost to Western traditions of
Mm.
spirituality. But when you look outside of the West, it is alive and well, because the ancestors play such an important role, not only in our own lineages, but also where we live, and honoring the ancestors of the land that we're on. So it's something that I have found to be a very grounded and balanced approach to spirit work. I do a
Yeah.
lot of shows, and a lot of, I would say 90% of who I read at a show, not grounded. They're not in their
Mm.
bodies.
That's
Have
why
you
they're
know,
there at the
have
show.
you
They're looking.
have you noticed that in your readings, Paul?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As it's people are just like, yeah, they're not grounded. They're just lost
Yeah.
energetically,
Absolutely.
and hopefully the majority of them that really, really, really need it are there at the shows. And it's hard to convince people, some of these metaphysical fairs or psychic fairs, some of them are just like, that's a taboo, and blah, 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 and stuff like that. But you'd be surprised of the amount of critics and those who don't believe in that end up going anyway. Just,
Oh
I got to
yeah.
check this out.
Like, dance, monkey, dance. Prove
Right.
yourself to me, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's when you go, your ancestors brought you here.
Yeah.
You listened, but you didn't have no idea what you were doing.
Yeah.
Now, especially with, and it's interesting too that science is starting to look into the genetic code. They're looking into our bloodlines and how the genes or DNA in general acts as a radio. The amount of information in our genetic code or in our DNA in general, our ancestral energy that's locked into there, and it acts as a radio within the universe that calls to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and from my counseling and training, right? We know that trauma is inherited.
Yeah.
Right? We understand that, these tendencies are genetically encoded, and as much as we might want to be very kind of black and white of this works, and everybody's story is different, everybody's background is different, and those ancestral memories or that ancestral influence cannot be removed, right? And so it might not be something that we can necessarily always explain with science, but I think we're starting to get an understanding that might use different words for the same thing, right? So like, for example, you might say that, we would hear in the old, the demon of addiction, right? The demon of the drink, that family has that, right? We might now see it as addiction, right? But there were still ways to handle that, because we're not just seeing it now, right? This has been going on since the beginning of time, right?
Yeah.
Mental health struggles and or energetic struggles, however, whatever language or viewpoint you want to take with that. But we're still dealing with the same thing, right? And I find it very unfortunate that for so long we would dismiss legitimate ways of handling this because of the terminology that was used. So there's a generational demon running in that family. There's a generational curse that's affecting that family. And it's like, is it untrue? If we look at it, if we take a different approach of looking at it as someone had a big trauma 8 generations back, and that influenced every single generation because they were raised with the shadow of that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think it's hopeful that it's going that way. I definitely see it going that way. I think the world is starting to open up or being forced to open up.
Yeah.
Depends on how you look at it, right? But yeah, it's hopeful, at least in that respect, for sure.
Yeah. What do you see as some of the most common mistakes you see people make within their spiritual practices?
Ooh, that's a Pandora's box that you're putting. Oh, there's a whole list. I wrote a blog post. Actually, I wrote a blog post about the 10 things that you need to ask your spiritual practitioner. You know,
Yeah.
if they're right for you or not. I think the first one that comes to mind that I feel like an evangelist about is you need to be able to cultivate your spiritual independence. And what I mean by that is you're not this independent person that's not connected to stuff and that what you say rules. No, but you don't want to be beholden to a guru.
Mm.
You don't want to be beholden to somebody where you're removing your personal responsibility, your discernment, your will, hand it over to some another person.
Yeah.
If you hand it over to spirit, I'm all for that. That's my jam. But somebody here, that doesn't sit well with me, right? You can get information, you can learn, but to me, I'm very much about you cultivating your own practice so that you're able to not always, and I say this as somebody who does readings, like it's my living,
Yeah.
right? But I don't think it's healthy that you're visiting me on a weekly basis. I don't think that serves, unless you're going through like a crisis and there's certain things going on. But mostly that's that doesn't sit right with me. I would say number two, not making room for spirit in your life.
Mm.
So, you can't be like, fix it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, right? But I think also we've created lives and our society is shaped us into we never have any spare time. So how are you going to fit spirit? A lot of people be like, I'm in the shower and I got this great. I'm like, yeah, because you're alone. You don't have a phone. You're not talking to somebody. You're not listening to a podcast or, something. You're being able to have a little bit of that quietness
Mm-hmm.
so that you can get some of that insight. I think we saw a lot of that when COVID happened.
Oh, yeah.
And, right? Did you not see this like enormous kind of spiritual awakening in the process? And I think it's because my theory is so much of the world was forced to be quiet for a little bit, right? You could only watch so much movies. You could only read so much,
Yeah.
we just had this time that for that least, I would say at least 100 years as a society, if not more, we haven't had, right? And so people were forced to hear that voice within for the first time, whether they liked what it said or didn't. And I think for a lot of people it's very uncomfortable.
That must have what are your thoughts on what happened during the lockdown? I mean, global. That must have made some very interesting universal cosmic impact.
Yeah.
Reversed of the atom bomb.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, look at the consequences afterwards, right? We have these mass resignations. We have this, aside from like the economic, I think the economic alone is, really impactful. But I'm not saying that people hearing their intuition for the first time was the only reason, but I don't think that it can be ruled out in regards to what we're seeing today. I don't know what happened. I don't claim to be a medium that knows everything, nor that I can read everyone. But what I do know is that when lockdown opened, and maybe it's a little bit different because in Canada and Ontario, we had a longer lockdown than in other places.
Yeah.
But when that opened, you could see the absolute thirst of people desperate to find more meaning in their life than the newest cell phone or the Instagram selfie or, and the reality is that organized religion has left a void, right? People are moving away from that, but doesn't mean we don't need spirit in our life. Doesn't mean that we don't, crave the understanding of that bigger than us force that exists, right? And I remember the first shows that I did when lockdown opened up. Never in my 20-year career had I seen the frenzy that I
Mm.
saw in those shows. Like it really, like I remember coming home and I was just like my first show and I was like, my husband's like, what's wrong? And I was like I was like a deer caught in hell. I'm like, I can't believe what I just saw. Like those were the craziest 7 hours that I've just worked because it was everywhere in every way, shape or form. People were just like, I need more. I've
Yeah.
realized I need more.
Mm. Yeah, and some people didn't get back to the normalcy that they had, what they thought they had
Mm-mm.
after everything got back to some sort of a normal. Some people just completely changed careers and
100%.
left and just did something completely different. They followed their spiritual path, whether they realized it was their spiritual path or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny that that story ties in a little bit for me because I had put this work on the back burner for a bit. I had gone through some personal problems that I was like, I just don't have the bandwidth to be able to hold this space. And the COVID knocked the snot out of me. And that they're like, back you go.
Yeah.
There's no avoiding this, right? So yeah,
Wow.
it's interesting.
Now, you also have a podcast, correct?
I do. It's on hold right now. I'm kind of reconceptualizing a bit how I want to present it, but yeah, it's called The Voice Within,
Cool. Cool.
and it was originally created to share personal stories of intuition.
Mm.
I wanted to hear from people or share the stories of, intuition's always in the background of really great stories. I had a kind of an inkling, or maybe something held me back, and so I'm like, wow, let's make intuition the story. And it was great. I loved the people that I had, but what I realized is it almost is the same story with different characters over and over again. So
Yeah.
me and my spirits are in the process of kind of rejigging for the new year. What's going to come out on the other end of it, this kind of voice within 2.0, how I'm going to shape it a little bit differently.
Cool. It definitely keep me posted, keep us posted.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
you're welcome. Maybe you can swap shows, collaborate, or something like that. I got some stories.
Love it.
No,
Love it. Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because where I'm considering going next is how different spirit workers work to help people develop their intuition better.
Mm,
Right. So whether it's, I read some of your bio and, like energetic interference, right? People don't like to talk about that, but
yeah.
that's very present and that very much blocks us from, connecting with our team and, understanding better. So yeah, that might be, I've been flirting with that idea for a while now. So we'll talk.
Definitely. Awesome. Awesome. So what's one thing that anybody can do like today when they listen to this show to start connecting to the spirit realm?
So make time, 5 minutes. I'm not even putting it just 5 minutes, whatever 5 minutes that you can do, whether that's before you go to bed at night as you're falling asleep, whether that's first thing in the morning before you take that sip of coffee, but it's creating the space so that you're able to start to recognize that there's this team that you walk with, right? And sitting in silence, sitting in prayer, maybe it's meditation. I'm not one to give this is your formula because I think every single one of us has a different recipe that makes up who we are and what we resonate with. And so, for years when I started on this path, I beat myself up a lot about meditation. I am diagnosed ADHD. I am. You don't see me now, but my hands are moving. They're fidgeting with something. My
Mm,
toes are tinkle. They're like being wiggled. There's constant movement. So when you ask somebody like me for meditation, I'm just going to be constantly failing because I'm like I just don't meet that, right? But what I've done very well my whole life, just because I was brought up very religious. I'm not religious now, but for me, prayer is effortless.
Yeah.
It is a state that I can be doing whatever. I can be in the middle of dealing with a client and I see their struggle and I'm silently, I'm like, I pray for this person. I pray that this is able to, that they're able to overcome this challenge, like while I'm driving, you name it. And so at the time when I had started, so I started practicing in 2004, end of 2004. No one talked about that. Everything was very meditation. It was very Eastern in the
Yeah.
approach of like trying to connect with that. And that's just never really been something that worked for me, right? That resonated. So, and it took me a long time to kind of realize, well, instead of trying and failing, why don't we just do what we do well, right? And so prayer is very, very important in my work, in the intention that I set before. I have an interview in the way that I start my morning, in the way that I close my day, in the uniqueness that is presented in each client that I have, right? So giving yourself the opportunity, and if you're an atheist or agnostic maybe, and prayer is something difficult for you, then quiet contemplation,
Yeah.
just a little bit of silence. Are your thoughts going to be racing? Probably, right? But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You start to kind of, maybe there's breathing exercises that you can do, but really kind of fostering an environment that shuts the outside world down and brings your attention to the inner world, right? Because that's where you're going to find your spirit team.
Mhm.
That's where you're going to find spirit. You got to find spirit there before you find spirit outside,
Yeah.
right? Right.
Yeah.
Before you allow that magic into your life, you got to make room for that magic, right?
Yeah. And we gotta put this thing down, put it away,
Yeah.
turn it off, all technology, and just go out, go for a hike, go out to a state park or a national reserve or something like that, and just sit down.
So I'm launching a workshop series in fall all about connecting with your ancestors. And it's 7 different workshops. You take whichever one you want. You don't have to take them as a set. Maybe just one resonates with you. But it's all about working with your ancestors. And my very first homework that I give in that workshop is to go by yourself for an hour in as nature as you can get. So maybe you live if you live in the Toronto area like I do, you're gonna have to go to a park because it's a concrete jungle here, very similar to New York. But something where you're seeing some type of trees, right? Even if it's just a park. And for 1 hour, you just go out and you set the intention of connecting with your ancestors while you're on that walk with nature. Because our ancestors, and when I say ancestors, it's not just the ones you know. It's not just your grandma, right? Like the real ancestors that you're working with, they're your ancient ancestors. They're old. They've been gone for a while. Their names have been probably forgotten by your family, right? But those ancestors lived and died by nature. Nature was crucial to how they believed. The transit of the stars, the phase of the moon, the seasons, all of that. And so what I recommend is go out and for that, set that intention that you're going to connect with your ancestors on that walk. And for that hour, connect, talk to them. You'll be shocked at what you see in nature as you're walking and talking with those ancestors, the animals that come by, the squirrels that stop and stare. And so it's understanding that, and I say this in my intuition class too, spirit has a unique language that it communicates with you.
Mm.
And the language that I have with spirit is not the same language that you have. And so it's important for you to start to kind of develop, what is that language? And 2, not to compare yourself, right? I think we see people with gifts that you're like, that's what I want. And I was like, but is that tied to your purpose?
Mm.
Is that tied how you function in life, right? Like I get that a lot from people. Oh, I wish I heard spirit since I was 4. And I was like, okay, that's great. I know you do. But, I went through a period of addiction because I didn't know how to handle spirit.
Mm.
And it was the only thing that I knew how to do to shut it off. It's not always pretty and it's not always comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very important to recognize how is that personally personalized for you, right?
Yeah. Wow. That's man. That could be a takeaway.
It's a huge takeaway.
That's a huge.
Yeah,
That's a huge takeaway. Definitely.
absolutely,
Um,
right? I
before
think
we,
that's the spirit, that's the language of our ancestors.
yeah,
Where did
yeah.
our ancestors look for when they did their divination? Even and they all did divination, right? Where did
Mm-hmm.
they look? They read the stars. I'm not saying anti-science, please. I'm not saying that at all. I think we can live in a world where both can exist.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking to connect with those, you got to understand the language that they speak, and they spoke nature.
Yeah.
And I'm not a nature person. I'm like a patio drink person. Like, I'm not excited about camping or anything like that. But I recognize that that's
Yeah.
where it was at with them. And if that's who I want to work with, then I got to adjust.
Huh. Wow. Before we wrap up the show, once again, how can people find you and reach out to you?
Yeah. So again, curandera.ca, curandera.ca. I offer a free 10-minute consultation to see if working together is the right fit. I don't feel that I'm meant to work with everybody. I think you need to resonate with who you work with. And, you know, sometimes people spend more time looking for shoes than they do for who they're gonna work with and help.
Yeah.
So definitely I recommend that you take advantage of that. I am a licensed counselor here in the Greater Toronto or in Ontario in Canada. So I am covered by insurance for those Canadians. But yeah, I'd say 90% of what I do can be done online. So yeah, I do Zoom sessions, and yeah, I'm always looking to, discover more, because I think, I don't know about you, Paul, but I think
Yeah.
my clients are lessons just as much as they get out of
Oh
it. I
yeah.
get out of it
Yeah.
too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a journey. You're on the journey by learning and experiencing through other people, through your clients, and then their experience. They're on that journey, or that next step, opening up that next door,
Yeah,
going down that next path. It's like, whoa.
for
Wow.
sure. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, what would you like to offer as a takeaway for our audience today?
You want to do that ancestral walk?
Yeah.
Do that ancestral walk and book your free 10 minutes, and we'll chat about it, because it's something that I think, in the West, we don't recognize the amount of help that these beings can have in our journey, right? They've been human. They've been
Mm-hmm.
human before they've had that experience. And I jokingly say this to people. I'm like, if you want something done and your guides are like, no, maybe it's not the time, go to your ancestors. That's the hack. You want a hack for today? You go to your ancestors, because your ancestors can override your guides sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're more connected to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. I like to see him have an argument. Oh man. That's where thunder comes from.
To be a fly on the wall, right?
Right. Carolina, namaste. Blessings, my friend.
Thank you very much, Paul. This was wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity.
Likewise. And welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody, for listening in to the Seances Before the Veil on Conscious Radio Network. And until next time, we'll see you then.